Psalm 77. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remember you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago, and I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject forever? Will he ever show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he, in anger, withheld his compassion? Then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years when the Most High stretched out his right hand, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all of your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm you redeem your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The heavens resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen. You led your people like a flock by the hands of Moses and Aaron.
Well, we continue on our chapter-a-day experience, and we've found ourselves in the Psalms this past week. And I'd love to spend a few minutes in Psalm 77 together today. Psalm 77 is a powerful and prophetic word speaking into our present moment in time. It shows us two things I'd like to consider together. First, the importance of lament. And second, the importance of remembering. Well, it seems like a bit of a distant memory at this stage, but part of my tradition was to drive the kids to school each morning on my way to work. And so we would load the kids in, and oftentimes they'd be still tired and they'd be a bit docile and quiet in the back. And we'd hit for the first couple of stop signs, and my mind would start getting to work. What are the things that I need to be doing? And my mind would start focusing in on that. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened where all of a sudden I hear one of the kids yell from the back, "Hey, Dad, where are you going? What's going on?" And I realize I'm almost at work and I still have the kids. Now they're late for school. I got to turn back around and drop them off. And I get so consumed with the present thoughts or the present moment that I entirely forget where I'm going. But as we think about that and the how we often become incredibly forgetful people, and we often get so consumed in the immediate moments. And I feel like sometimes when we're consumed in the immediate, we can lose our way. Psalm 77 was written by Asaph. Asaph was an artist. He was a musician. He had the task of bringing poetry and lyric to connect with the experiences of the world around him. And Psalm 77 was written in the midst of a national crisis. The world around them had changed drastically, and it was being threatened. It was written from a place of feeling personally overwhelmed. And what emerges is that clearly in the middle of this struggle, it feels like God is absent. Psalm 77 is known as a lament. In the Psalms, a lament was a pure and unhindered and very honest expression of our struggle and pain and our doubt. A lament was an intimate and a very risky and vulnerable prayer. In verses 7 to 9, in the heart of this lament, the psalmist wonders, where is God? And I'd love to read from verse 7 through 9, and it says this: will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his face again, his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in his anger withheld his compassion? These are 6 heart-aching, heart-breaking questions. It almost feels uncomfortable how brutally candid and honest this prayer gets if we truly consider and place ourselves in those words. Questions filled with despair, filled with doubts. The very thought of God is painful for the writer. He longs for the days gone by when God seemed so close, and now it seems that God has rejected him. His unfailing love has failed. His limitless compassion has now been exhausted, and it's found its limit. His promise has fallen to the ground empty and broken. Can you feel the tension in these words? These are very dark questions that rise up like the deepest shade of night. The psalmist is precariously dangling between despair and searching for hope in the circumstances that he finds himself in. The first half of the psalm is a true lament, and you can hear the depths of it. I'd like to just pause and make a couple observations about the lament. The lament is something that we haven't often given much space for in the context of our songs or our worship. But yet in the Psalms, which was their hymnal, they were a dominant expression of worship throughout the entire book. Now, I'm not sure where you are at in this moment. You may not be immersed in this type of raw emotion, and you might feel even a bit disconnected in your own experience from these words. I mean, the long weekend's upon us, the weather has shifted, it's sunny outside. And as we engage with these words from Psalm 77, you might feel as though they are distant from your experience. But as we consider the words of lament together, we know that also this is true. In this period of time that we find ourselves in, there are those around us and in our world that are desperately searching for words to express their feelings of God's absence in this moment. Together, we must make room for the lament in each other's lives and share in them together. Although you probably don't remember it, the very first sound that you uttered when you left the warm and protected confines of your mother's womb was a lament. You entered the cold, bright world in which you now live, and the first thing you did was to cry. No one needed to teach you how to lament because it was a natural part of the fabric of a world that is broken. To lament is to share in the human experience. And we all know sadness and we know tears, but many of us don't know how to lament well. Pain creates strong emotions, and often we don't know what to do with them. Our doubts in God's goodness are often left to lurk below the surface, and we're fearful to acknowledge them, fearful of being judged for them. Alexander McLaren says this. He says, "Doubts are better put into plain speech than laying diffused and darkening like poisonous mists in our hearts. A thought, be it good or bad, can be dealt with when it is made articulate." When we encounter the level of honesty expressed in Psalm 77 in person, we tend to want to scramble to resolve it, to move quickly from it, or even just to avoid it altogether. Our cultural tendency, even within the church, where we should give space for it, is sadly often resistant and uncomfortable with it. We don't do well sitting in honest struggle. And I think when we hear honest expressions of pain or doubt, especially asking questions of God like we have just read, it almost feels blasphemous to talk so carelessly about God. Maybe that's an unhealthy part of our unspoken traditions, never allowed to question God. But the truth is that the struggles and the doubts and the pain that we encounter in life, they don't go away quickly. And lament is about how we can learn to actually make it a part of our expression of worship or our relationship with God. The lament allows us to honestly wrestle with the circumstances of our lives and to raise difficult questions regarding the seeming absence of God as an expression of our worship. You see, the lament is not the opposite of worship, but rather it is a pathway of worship. Lament is the land between brokenness and God's mercy. And it allows us to see that it is the very penmanship of pain that writes the songs that will call us to dance. To lament is not to lack faith, but rather it is an act of faith. It takes courage to pray honestly and in the midst of doubt and pain. To lament, even with its messy struggle and tough questions, is an act of faith as we open our hearts honestly to God. We must learn to give space to each other for this without growing uncomfortable or scrambling to resolve it too quickly. It is an important expression of our worship to God to be free enough to be honest. And I think a great deal of what creates shallowness in our relationship with God is actually a fear of being honest with Him. So at a time that the world around us asks many questions, and as many of us experience shades of discouragement or despair, and in many circumstances where it feels like God is entirely absent, let us learn from the pages of Psalm 77 to lament well. The honesty of these moments, they are not a sign of a lack of faith, but rather they are invitations to act out our faith by opening the honesty of our hearts to God and sharing the struggles together. But Psalm 77 doesn't end there. And in our struggles and in our doubt and in our pain, as important as it is to learn to lament well, we must also learn to remember. In verse 10, we read of a powerful transition in the lyric. In verse 10, that the psalmist shifts his perspective. 10 through 12, it says this, "And then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years when the Most High stretched out His right hand, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all of your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds." And then in verse 19 we read this, "Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen." Let us revisit this moment that the psalmist brings to life. These words recall the story of the great Exodus. The Israelites had fled captivity in Egypt. They were camped along the edge of the sea, and their oppressors were closing in on them, and they had nowhere to go. The God who had promised their deliverance was entirely silent and was nowhere to be seen. And during the first 9 verses, the psalmist writes from the reference point of the Israelites as they were slaves, as they were oppressed by the circumstances around them and trapped. But in verse 10, a shift in tone arrests the reader. And the writer is now looking from the vantage point of Exodus chapter 15, when they were singing the song of the sea after they had reached the other side, after their rescue. And in fact, Psalm 77 mirrors much of this song. When we find ourselves in the chaos and the grips and the stormy sea in front of us, we need to shift our viewpoint of where we are in the story. We need to employ our remembering. Let's take note of this, that the writer's circumstances remained. Nothing had actually shifted, and yet the psalmist shifts his perspective. He takes on a different outlook. In the midst of his distress and without denying the reality of his pain and his circumstances, he turns his gaze from his personal circumstances and he turns his attention toward remembering God's faithfulness, towards remembering God's goodness and what He has done. As Israel stood between the Red Sea and the coming Egyptian army, they saw no hope. And they cried out to the Lord to deliver them from this situation. But in verse 19, and if you miss this, you kind of miss the entire psalm. In verse 19, it says this, that God's way was not from the circumstances, but it was in the sea and in the past, in the mighty waters. You see, although the psalm, Asaph is looking for deliverance from the circumstances, but God, in his providence, was at work in their circumstances. God was found in the waters. The very thing that they felt they were trapped by became the catalyst for their rescue and for God to show his faithfulness again. The dilemma of being caught between our expectations and hope of God and our perceptions of the current reality that we stand in are at the very center of Psalm 77. And do you see what the psalmist does? He anchors his lament, his doubts and his struggle and his pain. He anchors them to the truth of what God has done in the past. He reaches back to what God has done and leverages it to speak hope into his present. The psalmist invites a meeting between what we have known God to do and to be and to the present reality he feels God absent within. This past week, I had a chance to reach out to Pastor Peter and Precious, who lead the church at Enelani and Bobogaz, our two care points in Eswatini. We were supposed to visit there just a short few weeks ago with another Riverwood team, but that's not a possibility, obviously, in the current state of affairs. But this global crisis has hit Eswatini hard. They are a population at risk already with compromised immunities. The shutdowns have enlarged the poverty gap, and food supply has shrunk as the borders are closed down. It is a very difficult scenario right now, and one that likely feels much like Psalm 77, where God feels absent. I wanted to give you an opportunity to hear the words that I shared with Precious. And it felt like a real life reading for me of Psalm 77 for us to take part in. Now, the internet in Eswatini is not the most reliable. So please just make a little bit of room for some choppiness as the call was dropped a few times. And I've also added some subtitles in because the audio quality was a little bit difficult to achieve, but I wanted you to hear these words from Precious. Hello, Precious. It is so good to see you.
Hello, Pastor. Good to see you too.
I am so sad. I'm so sad that we couldn't visit. We were supposed to be there just a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, we understand, Pastor. Yeah. We understand.
We want to say greetings to Pastor Peter as well, and we've been praying for you, and we love you both so dearly.
Thank you so much. We feel that you are praying for us, although we are facing challenges, but we feel the peace in our hearts because of your prayers. That makes us to be strong.
Yes. How are you guys doing? We know that like for us, it's this the COVID has had a very, very big impact on all of us and on our businesses and on our lives and being able to see each other. Our church can't gather right now, but so we've had a lot to navigate. I can only imagine that the impact it's having for you. What has it been like in your side of the world?
Oh, Pastor, it's terrible on our side, and this pandemic has affected us a lot in our businesses and church. As you know, that we live by the income we get from the preschool, from the transport, and in church. everything is not working good for us. There is a lockdown, transport is being stopped, schools are being closed, and it's a struggle to open even the universities. So with us preschools, we don't know what will happen to us, but we are in a very, very bad situation. And even in church, we forced to go to church in groups of 20, and when it comes to offering, it's less than 100 rand. So we have to add fuel to Enalen and to Bobokazi. So we thank God that up to this far we survive, and we haven't got cancer scholarship. So this coming July we have to pay for her second semester. So if all has shut down, it's really bad on our side. But spiritually we are fine. We survive by God's grace. And when we look at the kids, because even the care points has closed, and there are kids that are taking ARVs. So now they have to take ARVs without food in their stomach, because their grandmothers that live with them, they make handwork to sell so that they can get whatever they get. But now even in the market is closed, no people are moving in town. So the situation is bad, and our district, Manzini, is leading with those who are affected by COVID-19. We are really affected by this pandemic.
Well, I can imagine it's where there already was a lot of struggle. This has been such a heavy weight, and I just want to say thank you for the courage that you and Peter are leading with to carry on trying to build into the people of your church in the midst of a time like this. I can imagine it's not just the physical needs, but that people are in a lot of anxiety and turmoil, and that is something that you have to carry and lead through.
Yes. And even in the shops, the prices of the food is going up. And this summer there was no rain, and even those who, even if we go to the fields, there is nothing with it. We cannot get anything because everything was damaged by the sun.
Wow.
So
it is a very difficult time. We can't imagine the weight that puts on you as you lead your church.
yes, Pastor, it's a very sensitive issue when you see someone who is needy and you're also in need. I was thinking, remembering at the back, some years back, where we had something that we can share with the people, but now even us, we are struggling. So it hurts, but there's nothing we can do. We only put our trust to God, because we will never stop trusting Him.
I really appreciate you sharing honestly and openly about your struggles. Precious, as a church, we're going through the Psalms, and we're talking about Psalm 77. And Psalm 77 is a very honest psalm from somebody that it feels like was in the same place. In fact, some of his questions to God were just saying, "Where are you in the middle of all of this? I'm trying to find you, and it feels like you've abandoned me." That he says all of these things. He says, "Where are you, God?" And he speaks very honestly. But then in the second half of the psalm, he says, "But here's what I'll do. I'm going to remember what you've done for us. I'm going to look back in the past and say, what is it that you have done for us when you brought us through the waters of Exodus?" And he recalls all of the things that God has done in their past. And in a way says, we are struggling. We don't see you right now. You feel absent, but we're going to remember what you did.
We get courage when we remember what God has done for us. We see God's work and we see that God is great. He is there. And in the beginning, where there was nothing, but the Spirit of God was there. So His Spirit is with us, although we may seem as if He is not with us. He has promised us that He is with us.
What are some of the moments that you would draw from? What do you look back on and say, God, I remember this is what you've done, and I'm going to take courage in that right now?
I remember that God has protected me from accidents. I remember God taking care of me when we were rejected from the first church where we were, and when we moved to Enalen, and we see that God is there with us. So when we look where we are from, we get courage that God is really God. He is there with us. So let us not, I get courage that I must not fear, because He is with me. He is with us. And there is no situation that will never pass. So in every situation, He is with us. When we read the Bible, He was with Daniel. He was with Stephen. He was with Ruth. He was with Hannah. He was with David. Everyone who put his trust to God, God will never leave him or her. So let us be faithful and trust God. Let us not look at the situation, but let us focus to God. Let us look upon Him. He is God. He will serve us. He made us. He knows us. So He has the solution for every situation that we come across.
I'm grateful for you to bring such conviction and life to the words that we're going to be going through together in the Psalms.
God has done great things for all of us. Each and every one of us can testify that God has done great things. And He is faithful. He's still going to do more and more great things for us. Thank you so much for everything. We love you.
We love you deeply, and precious. It is our prayer for you and Peter, for Enelani Church, Bobagaz, for all of your communities, that God would remind you of all that He's done in your lives and in our lives together, and that He would encourage you and build your faith through this time. Thank you for showing your faith to us. It is an encouragement to our church that we take deeply.
Amen. Thank you. Bye. Love
Bye.
you all.
I want to let you know of a couple things that we are doing in light of the needs that they find themselves in there. First of all, for Peter and Precious and their family, as a church, we're going to be sending a financial gift. You know, here in Canada, when work is lost, our government has stepped in to provide support, but that's not available to them. And so we're going to be sending, or we have sent $2,500 at this juncture to help support them and to replace the income that they have lost so that they can survive as a family and carry on. And secondly, every year we visit Eswatini, we collect care packages to bring. And we bring them from their sponsors to provide items that are needed. It's often for school supplies or for their families. And this year, without being able to travel, in lieu of our traditional care packages, we're going to be providing all of our sponsors with an opportunity to contribute the $40 towards a virtual care package. And this is going to go towards the emergency response, providing food for the children and their families. And if you're not a sponsor and would like to join in with that, you'll have the opportunity to do so as well. Just keep watch over this next week for a link in Twitter or on the Riverwood app, and we can invite you to be a part of that. I am so grateful for Precious and for the work her and Peter are doing to pastor their communities and the children that we are connected to. I'm so grateful that you got to hear from her voice speak such a vivid picture for us of Psalm 77 in action. All the way through the Old Testament, we see this practice that God had the Israelites do. At almost every moment when God had provided for them, or significant moment they experienced of God's presence, before they would move on from that place or that moment, God would ask them to construct an altar, a stone monument, a visual reminder of His provision and faithfulness. Now, these were not spectacular statues meant to represent luxury or fame or power. These were simple stone monuments that hold much more beauty than any golden statue could. They hold the beauty of anchoring them to the moments that God had shown Himself faithful. And they became the anchor to hope in when the seas in front of them grew violent or stormy again. When they lost sight of God, they had something to remember His faithfulness. And not just remember it, but to envision it again in whatever circumstance they found themselves in. In moments like many of us find ourselves today, we need to let one another's past experiences with God preach to our felt absence of God right now. We need to anchor ourselves to the way in which God has proven Himself faithful. And realize that most of the time in those experiences, when we went through them, we really weren't aware of what God was doing until it was done. And that even when the footprints are not visible, there God was guiding them through the sea, and there He is guiding us through ours. We can lament the pain and the brokenness and the doubts and the sufferings. We can even speak the doubts honestly. And in the honesty of our lament, let us reach back into what we know God's faithfulness in our lives to be, and in each other's lives. And let us allow them to anchor us back into the goodness of God and understand that it is often in the thick of the swirling waters that God is the most at work. And that though His footprints may be hidden under a sea in front of us, that God is faithful to guide us through it.